The Emperor's New Clothes by Hans Christian Andersen. A long time ago there lived an emperor who was so vain that he spent hours every day changing his clothes and looking at himself in the mirror. He wasn't interested in his soldiers who marched up and down in front of his palace. He didn't care about the musicians and actors who worked so hard to amuse him at the theatre. He thought that driving in the park was boring. The only thing that made him happy was buying new clothes. His palace stood in the middle of a large and busy town. One day 2 tricksters walked into the marketplace. They announced to the crowd that gathered round them that they were weavers. The cloth that they would weave was the finest to be found anywhere in the world, but only people who were clever and good at their jobs could actually see it. To all those who were stupid and incompetent, it was completely invisible. When the emperor heard this, he was very excited. "If I get some new clothes made of this material, I shall know which of my counselors are clever and which I should get rid of," he thought. So he gave the tricksters all the money they asked for and told them to start weaving. The 2 men brought their looms into the palace and pretended to set to work. Sitting at the looms, they moved their hands to and fro. But what had they done with fine silks and gold thread they insisted the emperor should buy for them? He so much wanted to see how they were getting on, but he dared not go into the room where they were working, for fear that he would not be able to see the wonderful material that they were weaving. That would mean he was really stupid. He decided to send his prime minister instead, for he was quite sure that this man was very clever. The prime minister, who was old and good-natured, went along happily to watch the weavers. "Goodness me," he said to himself, "I can't see any cloth." The weavers smiled and invited him to come closer, so that he could examine the exquisite detail of their work. The prime minister stared, opening his eyes as wide as he could. "Am I so stupid?" he thought. "Surely not. Yet perhaps I am not a very good prime minister. I'd better not admit that I can't see what they are doing." "Do tell us what you think," said one of the tricksters. "The cloth is beautiful," stammered the prime minister nervously. "How did you create such colours and patterns? I must report to the emperor at once." The tricksters smiled even more and spent a long time describing the intricate patterns and mixture of colours they had put into the cloth. The prime minister listened to all they said and repeated it faithfully to the emperor. The emperor believed everything his prime minister told him, so he agreed at once when the tricksters asked for more money and more gold thread. The next day the emperor was even more anxious to know how the work was progressing, and he sent one of his privy councillors to have a look. This man went up to the looms, and of course he saw nothing. "Now, don't you think that it is the finest piece of cloth you have ever seen?" asked one of the tricksters. "Goodness me," said the privy councillor to himself. "I know I'm not stupid, but I can't see the cloth. Perhaps I'll lose my job. I'd better not admit that I can't see a thing." So, out loud, he told the tricksters that it was the finest piece of cloth he had ever seen, and went straight back to the emperor and repeated his words. By now everyone knew about the wonderful cloth the tricksters were weaving, and at last the emperor could wait no longer. Accompanied by his prime minister, his privy councillor, and his courtiers, he went to the room where the weavers sat still at their empty looms. "Look, isn't it magnificent?" said the prime minister. "Observe the detail in the work," said the privy councillor. The emperor was horrified. "Why can I not see it?" he thought. "I must be stupid. Perhaps I'm not such a good emperor after all. I can't bear this." Aloud he said, "It is a Beautiful! The Prime Minister, the Privy Councillor, and the courtiers all stared at the looms. Not one of them could see any cloth, but they all said, "It is beautiful." "Your Majesty, why don't you have a suit of new clothes made from this exquisite material?" The two tricksters were now appointed royal knights of the looms, and were commanded to have the Emperor's new clothes ready for his next procession through the town. They worked all night to finish the royal suit of clothes. They cut the invisible material with their big scissors. They sewed the pieces together with invisible thread. And when they had finished, they asked if the Emperor would like to try on his new clothes. "You will feel as if you are not wearing any clothes at all," one of the tricksters said. "The material is so light and delicate." "It's like nothing we've ever seen before," said the courtiers, who could indeed see nothing. "Will you go to the mirror, Your Majesty?" asked the tricksters. "If we may take off your clothes, we will help you put the new ones on." So the Emperor stood in front of the mirror, and the tricksters pretended to dress him, tying round his waist an invisible train to be carried by the two noblest courtiers. Then everyone gazed at the Emperor and began to pay him compliments. "What a perfect fit," said one. "Those new clothes suit you so well," said another. The Emperor looked at himself in the mirror, and although he could see nothing but his bare flesh, he pretended to be as pleased with his new clothes as he'd ever been before. Outside the palace waited the silk canopy under which the Emperor was to walk in the procession. When he was ready, the courtiers who were to carry his train fell over themselves in their efforts to find it, because, of course, it wasn't there. At last they were settled, holding up their hands to carry the invisible train. As the procession began to move, the crowds lining the streets waved and shouted. They could all see that the Emperor was wearing his crown, yet no one dared admit to being so stupid that they couldn't see he was wearing any clothes. "What beautiful cloth!" they all called. "What wonderful new clothes!" But high above the crowds, perched on a lamp-post, was a child who shouted, "Look! There's a man with nothing on!" His father said, "Listen to what my little boy says." And one by one, people in the crowds passed the message on, until they all cried, "There's a man with nothing on." The Emperor heard their cries and knew in his heart that the people were right. But he thought to himself, "I must behave as if nothing were wrong." And he walked firmly ahead, while the courtiers continued to carry the royal train that wasn't there.